My name is Clara, and I am 27 years old. The night of my sister's wedding was the night my family finally showed me I didn't belong. I arrived at the glittering hotel in Boston, where the ballroom shimmered under chandeliers and crystal glassware. Laughter echoed, cameras flashed, and the scent of roses floated through the air. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, but the moment I walked in, I felt it, the quiet rejection that had always followed me like a shadow. When I finally found my seat, it wasn't beside my family or even among the guests. It was near the coat racks outside the ballroom. My name card looked freshly placed, like someone had gone out of their way to make a point. It wasn't an error. It was deliberate. I stood there for a long moment, clutching my clutch bag, feeling the weight of that small, cruel detail sink into me. The ballroom door stood open, spilling golden light across the marble floor, and I could see my mother laughing at the head table, Serena's perfect smile flashing beside her. My heart ached, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't.
It was always this way.
Ever since we were children, Serena had been the golden one, the charming, beautiful, loud daughter who could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was quiet,
Reserved.
I preferred books over parties, sincerity over show. And in our house, quiet was mistaken for dullness. My mother used to say I lacked sparkle, as if I were a dim lamp that embarrassed her in front of her friends. Serena was the kind of person who filled a room. I was the one people forgot was even in it. Still, I'd come to the wedding out of love, or at least the kind of love you keep offering even when it's never returned. I had spent weeks finding the perfect dress, a soft blue gown that fell gracefully to my ankles, modest but elegant. I'd even splurged on new heels, though the thought of standing in them all evening made me anxious. I wanted, for once, to feel seen.
To belong.
But that single name card by the coat racks told me everything I needed to know. Guests passed by, laughing and chatting, their perfumes mingling in the air. No one noticed me standing there, staring at my seat like it was some sort of cruel joke. I could hear the faint hum of the band tuning up inside, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of excitement as people waited for the bride and groom to arrive. It was supposed to be Serena's perfect night, and somehow, it had to be at my expense. I took a deep breath, fighting the sting in my eyes. I wouldn't cry. Not tonight. Not where they could see me and call me overly sensitive again. That was always their word for me, sensitive. As if feeling deeply was a flaw, something shameful to be corrected. I'd learned long ago that my tears only amused them. So instead I smiled, tight, cold, practiced. The kind of smile that hides pain and says, I'm fine, even when every part of you is breaking. I walked toward the ballroom, pretending not to care. I placed my coat neatly on the rack beside my seat and sat down just long enough to stare at the card again. Clara Whitmore. It read, written in gold cursive, elegant and precise. I traced the edge of it with my finger, remembering how I'd once loved seeing my name in such fine print, on birthday invitations, school awards, certificates I'd earned through hard work. But tonight, it looked like a label meant to isolate me, a reminder of my place. The faint chill from the open door brushed against my skin. From where I sat, I could see the ballroom in full. The soft glow of candles on every table, the massive floral arrangements bursting with white orchids and pale pink roses, the champagne flutes lined like soldiers, waiting to be raised in Serena's honor. Everything looked perfect. It always did when it came to her. My mother had spared no expense. Of course she hadn't. She'd been waiting for this day her whole life, talking about Serena's big moment, as though she were the one getting married. I still remembered the way her eyes had sparkled when she showed me the invitation, her tone dripping with pride. It's going to be the event of the year, she had said. And then, almost as an afterthought, she added, make sure you wear something flattering, dear. You don't want to fade into the background. I had wanted to laugh at the irony. I'd always been in the background. I wasn't sure she even knew how not to put me there. Now, watching the guests pour in, I realized just how thoroughly they had orchestrated it all. Every moment planned to perfection, every seat carefully assigned. And mine, I thought bitterly, was placed exactly where they believed I belonged, on the edge of their world, almost, but not quite, in it. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne glasses, and I reached for one, more out of habit than desire. The bubbles tickled my throat, but it did nothing to calm the tightness in my chest. I wanted to leave, to disappear before anyone noticed me, but another part of me refused to give them that satisfaction. I had every right to be here. I was family, even if they refused to see me that way. As I sat there, I caught my reflection in the window, pale skin, nervous eyes, a woman who looked tired of trying to fit in where she clearly didn't belong. Somewhere deep down, a voice whispered, "You deserve better than this." But I wasn't ready to believe it yet.
Not then.
I stayed seated, listening to the laughter spill from the ballroom, the faint strains of a violin carrying through the doorway. The warmth of the room didn't reach me, but I didn't move. For 27 years, I had been the girl on the outside looking in, and tonight was no different. Only now, it wasn't just painful, it was clarifying. It was the night I finally understood the truth that had been staring at me all along. I was never meant to belong in their world. And as much as that realization hurt, there was a strange strength in it too. Quiet, steady, waiting to rise. I stood there for a moment, staring at that lonely chair, my heart pounding in humiliation. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated like the family afterthought flashed through my mind. But this time, I refused to let it slide. I walked straight up to my mother, who was chatting with relatives near the champagne table. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, holding the place card in my hand. She turned to me, smiling softly, as if nothing was wrong. "Oh, Clara, don't make a scene. It's a full house tonight. You should just be grateful you got a seat at all." My throat tightened, but before I could respond, I caught sight of my sister Serena across the room, her perfect curls, her perfect dress, her perfect smirk. She was basking in the spotlight, the adored daughter, the family jewel. I had been invisible my entire life, but tonight, something in me snapped. The words my mother spoke, "Be grateful you got a seat at all," cut deeper than she could ever understand. That tone, that gentle cruelty disguised as poise, had been her weapon for as long as I could remember. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her disappointment, her subtle digs, her performative concern, all of it had trained me to shrink myself into silence. But that night, standing under the golden chandeliers of a ballroom I had no place in, something inside me shifted. I stared at her, my fingers trembling slightly around the delicate card. My mother, elegant as ever, was dressed in silver satin that shimmered as she turned, her pearls glowing against her skin. Her laughter, polished and perfect, mingled with that of her friends. She looked radiant, fulfilled, completely unaware of the storm building inside me. I wondered if she'd planned my humiliation, or if it had come to her naturally, as easily as breathing. "Grateful?" I repeated, my voice quieter than I intended, but steadier than I felt. "You really think that's what this is about?" She gave me that same look she always did when she wanted me to stop, an expression somewhere between pity and irritation. "Clara," she said softly, "please don't ruin this evening for your sister. It's her big day. Try to be supportive." Supportive. That word had become a leash around my neck. I'd spent my whole life being supportive, cheering Serena on at every recital, every pageant, every achievement that eclipsed my own. I'd been the one to sit silently when my mother praised her for being beautiful while telling me to work on my posture. I'd been the one to lend Serena my clothes, my notes, even my time when she needed help with things she didn't care to understand. And every single time, I was told how lucky I was to have such a charming sister. But tonight wasn't about Serena being charming. It was about me being invisible. I looked around the room, watching people swarm around her like she was a magnet for admiration. Her gown was custom-made, ivory silk hugging her curves in all the right places. Her hair was curled into effortless waves, her makeup immaculate, her diamond earrings catching the light with every movement. She was the kind of bride magazines wrote about, perfect, radiant, adored. And she knew it. When our eyes met across the room, she didn't flinch. She smiled, slowly, knowingly, and raised her glass as if to toast me from afar. The message was clear. You'll never be me. It was the same look she'd given me all my life, the look that said she was the sun, and I was just something orbiting her light. Only now, there was a sharpness behind her smile, an almost gleeful awareness that she'd succeeded in pushing me to the margins one last time. I felt the burn rise in my chest, the sting of humiliation turning into something fiercer. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of being the one who spoke out. I wasn't afraid of being labeled dramatic or ungrateful or sensitive. I was tired of swallowing pain to keep the peace, tired of pretending that my silence was grace. The air in the ballroom felt heavier now, scented with roses and champagne but tainted by something bitter. I could hear the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the faint hum of the band in the background, but it all felt distant, muted, like I was watching a movie I no longer wanted to be in. I took a slow breath and looked back at my mother. "You know," I said quietly, "for years I thought if I tried hard enough, you'd see me. Not as an inconvenience. Not as the spare daughter. Just me." My voice wavered slightly, but I didn't care. "But maybe you never wanted to." Her expression hardened for a moment, but she quickly masked it with that same polished calm. "Clara," she said under her breath, glancing around to see if anyone was listening, "this isn't the time or place." "Funny," I murmured. "That's what you always say. Never the time, never the place." The relatives standing nearby began to shift uncomfortably, pretending not to hear. My aunt busied herself adjusting her bracelet. My uncle cleared his throat. No one would intervene. They never did. Because in our family, silence wasn't just expected, it was tradition. I turned slightly, catching one last glimpse of Serena as she twirled gracefully with her new husband, her laughter floating above the music. Cameras flashed around her. Her world sparkled, just like always. And for the first time, I saw it clearly, not as something I envied, but as something hollow. The applause, the admiration, the curated perfection, it was all performance. And maybe it always had been. My hands were trembling now, not from fear but from the surge of emotion I'd spent years suppressing. Anger, hurt, exhaustion, all of it mixing into one sharp clarity. I had spent my whole life standing quietly in her shadow, believing that someday someone would turn and notice me. But they never did. They never would. Something in me, something buried deep, finally broke free. I placed the name card on the table beside my mother and whispered, "You can keep the seat." She blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Clara." But I didn't let her finish. I took a step back, then another, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as I turned away. My reflection caught briefly in the mirrored wall, my pale face, my steady eyes, and for once, I didn't see weakness staring back. I saw resolve. Serena's laughter echoed behind me like the ringing of a bell. Beautiful, hollow, distant. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because tonight, something in me had finally snapped, not into pieces, but into focus. Just as I turned to leave, Serena's new mother-in-law, Marjorie, appeared beside me, holding her phone. Her face was pale, but composed. "Clara," she said quietly, "I think you should see this." Before I could ask why, she stepped forward into the center of the room and raised her voice. "Everyone needs to hear something." The music faded, conversations died, and all eyes turned toward her. Marjorie held up her phone and pressed play. Serena's voice filled the ballroom, laughing, sneering, saying cruel things about her husband and his family. "They're so pathetic," Serena's recorded voice said. "Once the papers are signed and I have access to his $10 million trust, I'll make sure he dances to my tune." The guests gasped. The groom's face drained of color. Serena stammered, reaching for the phone, but Marjorie stepped back, shaking her head. The perfect wedding was crumbling before everyone's eyes. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The sound of Serena's voice, mocking, confident, venomous, echoed through the glittering hall like a cruel ghost. It was strange hearing her like that. I had always known what she was capable of behind closed doors, the sharpness hidden beneath her charm, the entitlement behind her smile. But now, the world was hearing it too. I stood frozen near the back of the room, my breath caught in my throat as dozens of faces turned from joy to shock. Guests exchanged wide-eyed looks, whispers breaking out like sparks across the ballroom. Some covered their mouths. Others simply stared at Serena, who stood near the dais in her ivory gown, trembling beneath the weight of her own words playing on loop. Marjorie's hand didn't shake as she held up the phone. She looked like a woman betrayed but determined to see justice done. There was something fierce in her stillness, a strength that only comes from heartbreak turned into resolve. For the first time that evening, I saw another woman who understood what it meant to be underestimated, to have appearances shatter around her. Serena's groom, Andrew, stood beside her, his face pale and tight, eyes hollow. I had met him only a handful of times, but I remembered thinking he seemed kind, a little too trusting maybe, but kind. Now he looked like a man who had just watched the foundation of his world crumble in front of him. The recording played on. Serena's laughter, smug and cruel, filled the space that moments ago had held music and joy. Every word landed like a blow. Every syllable stripped another layer of her facade away. Serena lunged forward, her heels scraping against the marble as she reached for the phone. "Stop it," she hissed. "Marjorie, you don't understand." But Marjorie didn't flinch. She simply took a step back, shaking her head slowly. "I understand perfectly," she said, her voice calm, almost heartbreakingly steady. The silence that followed was suffocating. The band members stood frozen with their instruments, the waiters paused mid-step, and even the chandeliers seemed to hum in the thick, tense air. The fairy tale illusion Serena had spent her whole life building, of perfection, beauty, and control, was unraveling right there on the dance floor. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear anything else. This wasn't what I had wanted when I confronted my mother, when I decided to stop staying silent. I hadn't wished for a spectacle. But life has a strange way of revealing truth at the most unexpected moments, and this one was blinding. Serena turned desperately toward her husband. "Andrew, please, this isn't what it sounds like," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. "It's out of context. I was just venting." Andrew didn't speak. He simply stared at her with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between disbelief and quiet devastation. I could almost see the storm behind his eyes as the people around them murmured, the perfect guests now unwilling witnesses to her downfall. My mother rushed forward then, her composure finally cracking. "Marjorie, this is highly inappropriate," she snapped, her voice trembling as she reached for her daughter. "Whatever this is, it can be handled privately." Marjorie cut her off with a look that could silence an entire room. "Privately?" she repeated, her voice sharp but steady. "She was privately planning to humiliate my son and destroy our family's trust. I think this deserves to be seen publicly." That sentence fell like thunder. My mother's face drained of color, and for the first time in my life, she had no response. I watched Serena crumble before me. Her hands trembled as she tried to gather herself, her painted smile gone, her breath shallow. The golden light that once made her shine now exposed every flaw, every fear. The same people who had once worshipped her charm now stared in cold judgment. And for once, there was no saving grace. No motherly cover-up. No easy escape. A part of me wanted to look away, to protect her, even after everything she'd done. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because beneath the shock, beneath the chaos, there was a quiet, unshakable truth pulsing in my chest. This was the consequence of her cruelty. Every time she had mocked me, diminished me, and watched as others laughed at my expense, every wound I'd carried in silence was now reflected in her trembling hands. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't satisfaction. It was simply balance. The scales had finally evened. Around us, the ballroom began to shift. Some guests slipped away toward the exit, unwilling to watch the drama unfold further. Others whispered into their phones, no doubt spreading the story even before the night had ended. The illusion of the Whitmore family's perfection, the elegant dynasty my mother cherished, was splintering like glass underfoot. I stood a little straighter. For once, I didn't feel small. Marjorie lowered her phone, her expression unreadable now. "I'm sorry it had to happen like this," she said quietly, though not to Serena, to me. Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a flicker of understanding, even pity. I gave a small nod, the lump in my throat too heavy for words. The guests began murmuring again, but the laughter was gone. The music would not resume. The sparkle had dimmed. And Serena, my flawless, untouchable sister, stood surrounded by the wreckage of her own making. The perfect wedding, the perfect image, the perfect lie, all of it was crumbling before everyone's eyes. My father, the man who had never once stood up for me, finally spoke. "Clara was right," he said, his voice firm and tired. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. That single sentence, just 4 words, felt heavier than all the years I had spent trying to earn his respect. It wasn't just an acknowledgement. It was an admission that every dismissal, every cold silence, every moment he had chosen Serena over me, had been wrong. The man who had once looked through me as if I were invisible now looked at me with something I had never seen before: recognition. The groom pulled a folded document from his pocket, annulment papers, already prepared. I could almost hear the sound of Serena's world cracking open. Her perfect smile vanished as her world collapsed around her. The whispers grew louder, the guests horrified, and the chandeliers seemed to flicker in the heavy silence that followed. I didn't stay to watch her fall apart. I stood still for a moment, feeling the air shift, as though the universe itself had exhaled after years of holding its breath. All my life, I had been the quiet one, the daughter who faded into the wallpaper while Serena glittered in the spotlight. I had watched her take everything: attention, affection, validation. But in that moment, I realized she had built her kingdom on deceit, and it had finally begun to crumble under its own weight. I walked out of that ballroom, my heels echoing down the marble corridor, and stepped into the cold night air. Each click of my heels sounded like punctuation to the end of a chapter. The chill met my skin, sharp and real, a reminder that I was alive, that I had survived every wound they'd ever dealt me. The doors closed behind me, muffling the chaos within, and for the first time, silence didn't feel like loneliness, it felt like peace. The lights of Boston Harbor shimmered in the distance, the frost biting my skin. The night smelled of salt and winter, and the wind tangled my hair as I walked toward the water. I had stood in that same spot once as a teenager, after Serena's graduation party, when no one had noticed I'd left early. Back then, the harbor had felt endless and cruel, a reminder of how small I was. But now, it looked different, vast, open, and full of possibility. I could still hear echoes of the ballroom behind me, gasps, murmurs, the sharp sound of someone crying, but they no longer belonged to my world. That chapter, that pain, that family dynamic built on hierarchy and pretense, it all ended tonight. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten one begging for a place at their table. That sentence lived in me like a heartbeat. I realized I had spent years trying to prove I was enough for them. Good enough, smart enough, obedient enough. But I had never once stopped to ask if they were worthy of me. I wasn't invisible. I was the one who had survived without their approval, without their praise, without the false comfort of belonging to a family that never really saw me. I felt free. The word carried a strange lightness, one I hadn't felt since childhood. Freedom wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, steady, like the slow uncoiling of a knot inside your chest. It was the first deep breath after years of holding it in. I was the woman who finally chose herself, and that was worth more than any family's approval. I let the thought settle deep inside me as the harbor lights danced across the waves. The cold didn't bite anymore. It felt cleansing. For the first time, I wasn't walking away from something, I was walking toward myself. And that, I knew, was the beginning of everything I had ever wanted.